She became the first American woman to reach the top of Everest without breathing equipment. But just hours after her success, she vanished into the mountain's most dangerous area. Her tail remained buried for 9 years until a British climber returned and did something no one else was brave enough to do. What he found, and what he did after that, changed everything. Frances Arsentiev had everything to live for. At 40 years old, she was an expert at climbing mountains, always smiling and full of big hopes. Her son Paul was the most important thing in her world, and her husband Sergei, a famous Russian climber called the Snow Leopard, loved dangerous mountaintops just like she did. But Frances had one dream that filled her mind. She wanted to become the first American woman to get to the top of Mount Everest without using extra oxygen. This was something that had already killed skilled climbers, a test that pushed human bodies beyond what they could handle. While preparing for her journey that spring, Frances quickly wrote a message to Paul and put in a map showing her route to the mountains. "Hi, Paul. We're at base camp. Miss you and love you, Mom." She didn't know that 9 years later, a British climber would make a decision that would totally transform her story. May 17, 1998. Mount Everest Base Camp was filled with the normal energy before people attempted to reach the peak. But Frances and Sergei Arsentiev were not like the other climbing groups. Unlike the well-prepared teams with their assistants, extra oxygen, and radio communication, this married couple climbed alone. This wasn't being reckless. It was a calculated gamble taken by two skilled high-altitude climbers. Sergei was called the Snow Leopard because of his amazing climbing accomplishments. But even legendary climbers can misjudge Everest. Their tries on May 20th and 21st both ended in failure. First, when their lights broke, then after climbing just 50 meters. By May 22nd, they had already spent 3 dangerous nights above 8,000 meters where human bodies begin to shut down. Any wise climber would have descended, but Frances wasn't thinking rationally about this dream. She was totally obsessed with it. At 1 o'clock in the morning on May 22nd, in freezing cold that could damage skin in seconds, they began their last try to reach the summit, moving more slowly than before. Without extra oxygen, they climbed through the darkness toward their fate. They had no idea that this decision would separate them forever. One would become legendary forever. The other would vanish without a trace, and both would become part of Everest's most frightening puzzle. Time passed. The sun rose over the peaks, revealing 2 small figures still climbing when they should have been descending. They were making a fatal error that would create both a legend and a disaster that would take 9 years to understand. Late in the afternoon of May 22, 1998, Frances Arsentiev stood at the top of Mount Everest. She had achieved it. She was the first American woman to reach the world's tallest point without extra oxygen. But instead of feeling triumphant, she only felt totally drained. Her body was failing. Her movements were sluggish and awkward. Beside her, Sergei was equally worn out. They had reached the summit dangerously late in the day, an error that kills more climbers than anything else on Everest. The basic rule of Everest is clear. Getting to the top is only half the task. Getting down safely is what separates success from disaster. As they began descending in the dying light, neither could have predicted they were starting the most heartbreaking split in mountaineering history. Somewhere in the blackness, confused from exhaustion and oxygen deprivation, they became separated from each other. By morning, Sergei had returned to camp, but Frances was missing. The reality struck him like an avalanche. His wife, the woman he'd climbed the world's tallest mountains with, the mother of young Paul waiting at home, was somewhere above him on the mountain, alone and in trouble. Without hesitation, Sergei took an oxygen tank and medical supplies and headed back up into the death zone. He was going to rescue her or die in the attempt. Nobody who knew Sergei was shocked by this decision. It was exactly what the snow leopard would do. But as he climbed upward, searching frantically for any trace of Frances, he couldn't know that other climbers had already discovered her, and what they discovered would haunt them forever. A Uzbek climbing group attempting to reach the summit had found Frances near the top. She was barely conscious, suffering terribly from oxygen starvation and frostbite. Her situation was critical, but she was still alive. The Uzbek climbers did what they could. They provided her oxygen, attempted to help her move, but they were climbing without local guides and had limited equipment. Eventually, exhausted and running low on their own oxygen, they had to abandon her with an empty oxygen bottle and descend to save their own lives. But they made one crucial decision that would help preserve life. They clipped her safety harness to a fixed rope to prevent her from falling down the mountain face. That evening, as the Uzbek team descended, they encountered Sergei climbing up through the darkness, still searching for his wife. They told him her location. It was the final time anyone would see the snow leopard alive. What occurred next would remain a puzzle for an entire year, but when the truth eventually emerged, it would reveal the true extent of love and sacrifice in one of climbing's greatest disasters. May 24, 1998. British climber Ian Woodall and South African climber Cathy O'Dowd were 300 meters from the Everest summit when O'Dowd spotted something that would transform both their lives forever. A glimpse of purple fabric, a jerky motion in the shadows of the first step. "That body's alive," O'Dowd told her partner. "I'm going to check it out." What she discovered would give her nightmares for years. Lying in a contorted position, clipped to a fixed rope, was a woman with skin as white and smooth as porcelain, a mark of serious frostbite that made her look like a sleeping doll. Her long, dark hair framed a face that was lovely, despite what the mountain had done to her. Then the woman opened her eyes. "Don't leave me," she whispered, her pupils enormous black circles in the thin air. "Don't leave me here to die." O'Dowd felt nauseated. The woman resembled her, same age, similar appearance. For a terrifying moment she felt like she was seeing what could happen to her. "I am an American," the woman said suddenly. "I am an American." That's when they realized who she was. Frances Arsentiev, the happy woman who had sat in their base camp tent just days earlier, talking about her son Paul back home, sharing tea and family stories. Ian Woodall arrived with his Sherpa team. They discovered Sergei's ice axe and rope lying nearby, but no sign of the Russian climber. The empty oxygen bottle the Uzbek team had left was beside Frances, and her thick gloves were scattered around. Signs of hypothermia had made her feel dangerously overheated, causing her to remove protective clothing. For more than an hour they attempted everything. They tried to lift her into a sitting position, but she was completely weak, unable to support her own weight. They tried to get her arms into her jacket sleeves, but she couldn't control her movements. When they tried to make her stand, her legs gave out like wet noodles. "If you can help us, we can try to move you down the mountain," Woodall told her, looking directly into her face, searching for any sign that she understood. "If you don't, you're going to die." There was nothing. She was conscious but not mentally present. The mountain had taken her mind even before it took her life. The temperature was minus 30 degrees Celsius. Standing motionless for more than an hour, the rescue team was beginning to get frostbite themselves. They faced an impossible decision: attempt a rescue that would probably kill them all, or leave a conscious woman to die alone on the mountain. "Why are you doing this to me?" Frances asked, her voice barely audible. Those words stung more than any wind. She didn't realize that they were trying to help. In her oxygen-starved confusion, She believed they were harming her intentionally. The decision came without discussion. Even the Uzbek climbers who had attempted to help her the day before had reached the same conclusion: she was too far gone to save. As they prepared to leave, Frances had stopped speaking and seemed to lose consciousness. O'Dowd lost all motivation to reach the summit. "I climb because I enjoy it," she would later say. "After finding Frances, there was no way reaching the top could have made me happy." They left her there, still clipped to the guide rope, still breathing. It was the final time she would be seen alive. But the puzzle of what happened to Sergei was just beginning, and Frances's story itself was far from finished. Frances Arsentiev died alone on May the 24th, 1998, still clipped to that guide rope high on Mount Everest. The woman who had achieved her greatest dream, becoming the first American woman to climb Everest without oxygen, had paid the ultimate price. But what happened to Sergei remained a disturbing puzzle. The last time anyone saw him for certain was when the Uzbek climbers met him climbing up through the darkness on May 23rd, carrying oxygen and medical supplies to rescue his wife. After that, the snow leopard simply vanished into the thin air of the death zone. Had he reached Frances? His ice axe and rope found beside her suggested he had, but where was his body? How had he died? The questions tormented everyone who knew their story. Back home in Colorado, 10-year-old Paul DiStefano waited for news that would never arrive. His mother's final letter, with its cheerful message and hand-drawn map, became a heartbreaking reminder of dreams that turned into nightmares. But on Everest, Frances' story was just beginning its most disturbing chapter. Her body lay where everyone could see it on the main climbing route. In her purple jacket, she became a ghoulish landmark climbers called Sleeping Beauty. Season after season, hundreds passed her body. Some paid their respects, others hurried by, disturbed. A few took photographs that circulated online, turning her death into a horrible tourist attraction. "Turn right at the guy with the green boots," climbers would say. "Turn left at the woman in the purple jacket." There was no dignity in it. The cost of bringing a body down from that altitude was estimated between $40,000 and $100,000. The technical challenges were enormous, the moral questions even larger. Who was responsible? Who had the right? For 9 years, Frances Arsentiev remained where she died, a frozen monument to both human ambition and human tragedy. Thousands of people saw her. Hundreds passed within feet of her body. But nobody did anything about it until 2007, when one man decided enough was enough. The same British climber who had abandoned his own summit attempt to stay with her in her final hours couldn't forget those desperate words. "Don't leave me here to die." Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much. He had to leave her there to die because there was nothing else he could do. But now, 9 years later, Ian Woodall was going back to keep a promise he had held in his heart for nearly 10 years. What he was about to do had never been done before, was very risky, and was something that had to be done. The trip Woodall put together was called the Tao of Everest, and its goal was different from anything else in mountain climbing history. Woodall wanted to go back and give Frances Arsentiev the proper burial she deserved. Moving a frozen body at 8,500 meters would need amazing strength, perfect weather, and huge courage. One wrong move could cause more people to die. In 1999, Jake Norton had found Sergei's body, apparently killed in a fall while trying to save his wife. The proof showed Sergei had gotten to Frances and tried to rescue her, leaving his ice pick and rope next to her, but trying to save her killed him. It was a love story that ended in tragedy for both of them. The snow leopard had died doing what he always did, trying something impossible to save someone he loved. Now, Woodall wanted to honor what both of them meant to people. As his team made base camp in 2007, Woodall told them why he was doing this. In my mind, I hoped someone would someday do something for her, but the only reason anyone would be up that high is if they're climbing to the top or coming back down. Either way, you can't really take the hours you need to bury a body. It needed a special trip. This was that trip. Finding the exact spot would take days. The job of moving her body would wear them out at a height where every breath is hard work, and the good weather for such a job wouldn't last long. One storm could trap the team in the death zone with no way to get rescued. But Woodall had made a promise 9 years before. As he had walked away from Frances Arsentiev, leaving her to die alone on the mountain, he had promised that someday, somehow, he would come back to give her respect in death. That day had finally arrived. May 23, 2007, exactly 9 years after Frances Arsentiev said her last words to another person, Ian Woodall stood beside her body again. She looked exactly like she had in 1998. The freezing cold and thin air had kept her perfectly unchanged, like a frozen moment from that awful day. Her purple coat was still bright against the gray stone. Her dark hair still surrounded her face. She still looked like she was asleep. But now, at last, someone had come to wake her from her long sleep. Woodall and his team had brought an American flag up the mountain. In a short but touching ceremony at 8,500 meters above sea level, they placed it over Frances' body and said a prayer. For the first time in 9 years, she was treated not as a marker or a scary story, but as a person who deserved respect. Then came the hard part. Moving a frozen body at that height pushed what humans could do to the limit. Every movement took huge effort in the thin air. The team worked carefully, slowly, respectfully. They weren't just moving a dead body, they were doing something sacred. Slowly, respectfully, they moved Frances to a lower place on the mountainside, putting her where she could no longer be seen by passing climbers. They built a simple pile of stones, the only burial that was possible at that height. For the first time since 1998, climbers trying Everest's north route would not have to walk past the Sleeping Beauty. She had finally been put to rest with dignity. Woodall later thought about the trip. This will be my last expedition, so I thought it would be right to give something back. But the expedition did more than just move a body. It honored the memory of both Frances and Sergei Arsentiev, a couple whose love story had become one of mountain climbing's biggest tragedies and biggest examples of giving everything for someone else. The woman who dreamed of being the first American to climb Everest without oxygen had reached her goal, even though it cost her everything. The husband who could have saved himself had chosen to die trying to rescue the woman he loved, and a British climber who had carried guilt and sadness for 9 years had finally found a way to turn tragedy into something meaningful. Today, Paul DiStefano, the 10-year-old boy who said goodbye to his mother in 1998, is a grown man. He carries with him not just the memory of her last letter, but the knowledge that strangers cared enough about his mother to risk their lives, making sure she was treated with respect. Frances Arsentiev's story reminds us that sometimes the biggest wins come at the highest price, that love can make people try the impossible, and that even in death, even on the world's most cruel mountain, human kindness can beat not caring. She vanished from Mount Everest in 1998. 9 years later, a British climber did something that showed the best of humanity lives on even in the worst times. He kept a promise that honor required, but few would have kept. In doing this, he gave the Sleeping Beauty something more valuable than any mountaintop. He gave her peace. Did you like this story? Would you risk your own life to save another person, even knowing you'd likely die too? Share your thoughts in the comments section. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. Sometimes the wisest choice is to step back and return when you can make the right decision. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in our next video. Hope you have a wonderful day.